How about now? Wow, we got a long way into this to not have audio. That's tough. Okay, so we were talking about money. He throws back the 30 pieces of silver.
Chief priests and scribes, elders, pick it up.
Say they can't use the money because it's blood money. It can't go back into the treasury.
Right.
And the question I asked was,
did it come from the treasury in the first place?
Wouldn't we expect that the money would originally have come from the treasury?
You'd think it was, but they're...
Yeah. Right. So if the money, so that all I'm saying is, so the money came from the treasury.
Okay.
They gave it to Judas, and now their understanding of the money is that the blood of Jesus, the condemnation and the sinful act that Judas committed,
right, made the money unclean.
Made the money unclean. So they weren't willing to. So then, if that money is now in the possession of the chief priests and it can't go back into the treasury, what do they do with it? Is it embezzlement if you take it? You know what I mean? Like the IRS would have a problem with this. You did not receipt that back in.
But no tax on tips.
Is that a tip?
I don't know.
It's a. Does it still count as a charitable donation? Can we write it off?
Remuneration to the. It was a contract labor thing.
Contract labor, yeah. So what did they do?
They write it off as labor on their expense report. Yeah.
So verse 7 says, so they took counsel and bought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers.
Okay, so they actually formed a committee.
They formed a committee
and decided what to do with
church committee. There's 30 pieces of silver. We can't accept it as offering. What should we do with it? Let's buy some land.
Right. Then we can.
It can't go into the treasury, but we can own land based on.
Yeah, but you said right here how they designated it.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. First NGO.
Non-government office.
Yeah.
Through a committee.
Okay.
USAID.
So it says there. Yeah. Therefore, that field has been called the field of blood to this day.
Potter's field. Yeah.
Then was fulfilled what had been spoken by the prophet Jeremiah, saying, and they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of him on whom a price had been set by some of the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field as the Lord directed me. So we found our 30 pieces of silver.
And the whys and wherefores.
So our remez to this 30 pieces of silver is the story of Jeremiah.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's also a reference to Zechariah.
Of corruption.
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's talk about Pilate and this thing, and we've got a little bit more to get through. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said,
"Thou sayest."
You have said so. Yeah. But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he gave no answer. And then Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge.
Right.
So that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the crowd any one prisoner whom they wanted. And they had then a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when they had gathered, Pilate said to them, whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ? For he knew that it was out of envy that they had delivered him up. Besides, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, have nothing to do with the righteous man, for I have suffered much because of him today in a dream. Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to destroy Jesus. The governor said to them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ? And they all said, let him be crucified. And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him! Let him be crucified!" So when Pilate saw that he was gaining nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." And all the people answered, "His blood be on us and our children." Then he released from them Barabbas, and having scourged Jesus, delivered him to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole battalion before him, and they stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and put a reed in his right hand, and kneeling before him, they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him, and took the reed, and struck him on the head. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the robe, and put on his own clothes on him, and led him away to crucify him. Quite the story. So, let's see. I'm going to turn over here to John chapter 19 and decide if I want to read this now or read this later. I have it in my notes to read it later, but I want to make sure. Yeah, I want to read that later. Okay. We're going to end up in John chapter 19. That's my free giveaway right now. So, Jesus is crucified eventually. We're going to talk about that later, in a couple weeks. But Jesus is crucified.
Yes.
Crucifixion, if you didn't know, is a Roman execution.
Right.
It's very public.
Yeah, it was devised by and used by the Romans exclusively to show traitors and whatever.
Yeah, rabble rousers and people who are bent on trying to overturn the government. They're trying to take back control.
It was the most, at this time, the most cruel form of execution, because normally the prisoners would be tied to the cross and they would die of suffocation.
Basically suffocating and dying. Yeah. So this particular patch of land, tough to manage?
You're talking about Jerusalem?
Yes.
Yes.
Tough to manage for the Romans, right?
Right.
We've talked about the different people groups, the Essenes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, who else am I? The Herodians and the Zealots. Of all of those groups of people, who are the hardest to keep in line?
Zealots.
The Zealots. They're the problem.
Well, that's where Barabbas, that's where he came from.
That is definitely where he came from, yes. So in Jerusalem, in and around Judea, in this area where Israel is, crucifixion was exclusive to the Zealots.
Right.
So Jesus is crucified between two Zealots.
Right.
This is going to be important later on. So, let's talk about a few things, because we're asking the question. The question we're asking about the trial today is, who killed Jesus?
Right.
So that's a question I'm asking that we're going to kind of wrestle through. And I think there's some lullaby effect that we get in this story, that we miss some things, like missing out on the Potter's Field thing.
Right.
So remind me about the Pharisees. Who are the Pharisees?
The law keepers.
They're law keepers and law teachers, right?
Right. They taught the law. They kept the law. They basically chastised everyone that couldn't keep the law.
Are they rich and extravagant people?
Not really.
Not really.
They were just in
very basic.
Very basic. They kept the law.
Committed to the law.
They were committed to that.
Where did they go? Like they're not in Jerusalem, generally speaking.
No,
There's some that live there, but
yeah,
not most of
they
them,
were
right?
up north.
They were up north in the Galilee.
Right.
Built their own cities.
Right.
They call it the religious triangle up there.
Yes.
Those cities up there north, were they like really nice, fancy?
No, they were just pretty plain.
Pretty plain.
Yeah. No fancy buildings, no castles. No.
Is there something specific about the way they built their town?
Around the synagogue.
Around the synagogue. Synagogue's center of town.
Right.
They wanted everybody to be just as close to the word.
Right.
Because they wanted to build their whole life around.
Their whole thing was to teach the law, to teach the law, to teach the law.
Yes.
And then make everybody sure everybody followed the law.
Yes.
As best they could.
And so everybody is their livelihood and their space and their centered around
the synagogue in that particular village or whatever you call it. They weren't big cities, but they were just
they were
many small places. Yeah.
But the synagogue was the center of it.
Right.
Everybody was as close to the word as everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
What about the Sadducees? Who are they? They
took care of the temple.
They're the temple people. Yeah. Right. They're the priests.
Yeah.
Where do we get the term Sadducees? It's a translation of a different word. Do you remember it?
No.
Zadokим.
Zadokim.
So that meant they were of the family of
Levi.
Zadok.
Zadok. Yeah.
Yes, originally Levi. It goes all the way back to Levi. But is that family of Zadok important? Do you remember the story of why that family of Zadok is so important?
No.
In the first century BC, there's this uprising and this movement in. You have the Hellenism starts to grow, right? Okay. And the Greeks are here,
right?
Still pretty stable in the area, right? The Greeks didn't come with force.
No, they just came and said, hey, we've got a better evangelion message to you.
Yes.
We can have you, we'll have hospitals, we'll have gymnasiums, we'll have entertainment, we'll have fun and games. This is a good life, and we'll give you everything you need. All you have to do is be obedient to what we say.
Yeah, be partners with us.
Yeah.
So everything's fine. Then we get we see the Romans on the horizon.
Right.
And we're concerned. They're not as gentle and accepting as the Greeks,
Romans,
right?
The Romans' whole thing was to conquer and ship you out.
Yeah, they're gonna. So what are we gonna do?
We're gonna make nice with the Romans.
So how do we make nice with the Romans?
Offer them money.
We got to find somebody with a bunch of money that has resources and influence.
This guy's in charge of the spice trade.
So Herod, the leader of the spice trade, becomes Herod the Great.
Right.
He basically gets adopted.
Honorary Jew.
He becomes an honorary Jew and becomes king of the Jews.
Right. Because
he does
that's only because he married a Jewess.
He married a priest's daughter, and they considered him Jewish and made him their king.
Right.
And now he goes and negotiates and and he is, like, let's be honest, Herod the Great, an incredible leader, governmental leader. He keeps this incredible balance in the area. This specific place that refuses to do what? In the Roman culture, what is the one thing that everybody ultimately has to do?
Honor Caesar.
They got to honor Caesar. They got to bow to Caesar. This place refuses to do it.
Right. But because of his money,
they
allowed it.
The Romans overlooked it because he was so good at keeping peace here, keeping these people from being out of control. He gave the people what they wanted. He built stuff that honored Rome. He was this nice balance that kept balance between the two sides, kept the tension down. But he, like all great men, did something. He died. And when he died, his kingdom was split into thirds.
Right. 3 sons.
And who took the center section that included this patch of dirt that was Jerusalem?
You said it before.
Archelaus.
Archelaus. Yeah.
Was Archelaus dad?
What?
Was Archelaus as good
Oh no,
as?
he's a real screw up.
No, he was not good, right? He did not handle. So stuff starts to get out of control. We get the Maccabean revolt. Things
Right.
are not going well. So the Romans say, all right, Archelaus, you're out. We need someone who can create and maintain order and
Right,
is going to be strong and firm.
That's when Rome came in and said, look, you can still be king, but you're just going to be the tetrarch. We're going to appoint a governor
And
from Rome. Will take over.
Who's the bulldog that comes from Rome that holds power?
Pontius Pilate.
Pontius Pilate. And he is going to keep things in order. He is law and order. He will snuff out any type of uprising. You're going to stay in place. They build, what's it called?
Well, he had
the Antonio Fortress.
Yeah.
They build up this fortress in town that overlooks all of town, even stands as an imposing force over the temple.
Right.
So they can look down into the temple, everything that's happening from the Antonio Fortress. So we have this incredible happening that is the Romans showing their power, showing their influence. They see everything. A week ago, Jesus comes in to town opposite
Pontius Pilate on his white horse, leading the legion.
Do you think the people that were on the watchtower, the Antonio Fortress, saw those two things happening?
I'm sure they did.
Yeah, because it's the highest point in town.
Yeah.
They saw both.
They saw this crowd of people gathering palm fronds and throwing their clothes on the street, and they saw.
So the Romans were aware of what was going on. Sure. They saw this political action.
Right.
But do you think they were thrown off by where Jesus went next? Because he was opposite Pontius Pilate coming into town. But then the watchman that keeps eye on him, did he come bearing a sword and start fighting?
He did come into the temple.
Oh, he went next door?
Mm-hmm.
He starts turning over the temple.
Right.
Creating a ruckus.
Right.
Should we be worried about this guy?
No.
Who's causing a ruckus?
They backed off and said, we can't touch those people because they're in the temple and
let's not mess with them.
We're being commanded to leave them alone unless they get outside the temple.
So then Pontius Pilate finally, a week later, has him sitting in front of him. And he sits down on the judgment seat, so he's hearing, like he sits on the judgment seat. If he's sitting on the judgment seat, whatever he says is final at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So then he goes, all right, now what? What's happening now?
They've accused this.
They've made all these accusations against you, and he says,
what do you say?
Aren't you going to say something?
Nope.
And Matthew goes to the effort to say, while he was sitting on the judgment seat, a messenger came and brought a message from who?
His wife.
From his wife, said, hey, don't have anything to do with this
guy.
Yeah. And she calls him a what? She uses a term when she says something about this righteous. Right? I just gave it away. Don't have anything to do with this righteous man.
Yeah. Well, innocent man.
The innocent
man.
She
knew he was innocent, but she said she'd had a dream.
Yeah.
A vision, whatever.
Now so is Pilate just bent on killing him?
No, he doesn't want anything to do with it because it's not his problem.
So, right, it's not his problem. Now, it was the Romans who were the only ones who had authority to crucify.
Right.
They were the only ones who could execute capital punishment with the Romans.
Right.
Now,
but Pontius Pilate said, "You handle it."
Oh. Now, it seems as though there's this governing body for the Jewish people that's supposed to be making things happen. Do you know the name of that governing body?
Maybe the Sadducees.
Not the Sadducees. It's half Sadducees and half Pharisees. There's 72 people in this governing body. Starts with an S.
Oh,
Anybody?
can you read it? Sanhedrin.
The Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin court.
Congratulations, audience. You win the prize.
The Sanhedrin court
Mm-hmm.
has 72
Okay,
members. Half of
Where
them.
was the 72? I've never heard the number 72.
So they have 36 Pharisees,
36 Sadducees.
36 Sadducees.
That's a lot of.
And they come together. That's the official Sanhedrin. They meet during the day. They have conversations. Sanhedrin court or the council, that would be them.
Okay.
The official.
Back to the 30 pieces of silver.
Uh-huh.
Who
Who gave up the 30 pieces of silver?
I'm betting it was the Sanhedrin.
What does it say?
That doesn't say.
It does.
Where?
It says that.
It said the council. They took counsel of what to do with the money.
Oh, about the spending?
Yeah.
So where did he brought back the 30 pieces of silver to?
The temple.
Nope. Read it again. Verse 3. Judas had changed his mind, and he brought back the 30 pieces of silver to
the chief priests and elders.
Chief priests and the elders. Seems that keeps coming up a lot.
Well, okay, would it be?
So there is an official Sanhedrin that I just described to you. There's also a unofficial Sanhedrin that operates more like the mafia.
You mean the shadow government?
Yes. They had the temple guard.
The temple guard?
Yeah, they had a hit squad.
Okay.
Who do you think?
The Praetorian Guard, but this was the Sanhedrin's.
Yes. The other Sanhedrin, that's not exactly the Sanhedrin, but it is the Sanhedrin. No Pharisees really in this one. Guess who runs this deal?
Sadducees only?
Sadducees only. Specifically, who do you think runs this?
Probably the chief priest.
The chief priests, which would all come from where? There's only one family.
Right.
At this point, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did this particular family get power? What happened with that one guy who had all the money?
He married the head guy's daughter.
Yep. Okay. And now he gets favor with Rome, and he says, how does this thing work? Oh, there's a high priestly family. There's a chief priest. Yeah, it rotates between these 7 families.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're talking about Caiaphas at this point?
No, not Caiaphas. I'm talking about Herod. Herod the Great.
Okay.
When he takes power and organizes everything after the Maccabean revolt, he gathers the people together, those 7 families that are part of the family, the Zadokим, and he says, the high priestly role rotates between your families. I will sell it to the highest bidder and declare that person, that family, the chief priestly family, and it won't rotate anymore.
So Herod.
So the family of Annas buys it.
Who?
Annas.
Okay.
Which is the father of Caiaphas.
Okay.
They're going to operate. That family alone operates the priestly. And so the corruption enters the priesthood at this point because it now becomes a money contest. So now our money contest. And this influence is going to be dictated by money and power. And the corruption begins. And now we're part of this corrupt system that Jesus is going to rail against. So the Sadducees, this corrupt Sanhedrin, this false Sanhedrin that makes decisions in the dark and then comes out to the main Sanhedrin and makes a recommendation. What happens, you think, when people that are Pharisees or other Sadducees who are like, you know what, I disagree. I don't think that's the right way to do things. What do you think happens to them?
They probably disappeared.
They go swimming with the fishies. right? Like,
Well, okay, so this is where we get the term dark money.
yes. So what happens at night when Jesus gets arrested? He doesn't get arrested, really. He gets mobbed
Right. There's
and tied up
right
and led where?
to Caiaphas's house, who was the chief priest at the time.
So are we at the Sanhedrin?
No, we're at Caiaphas's house.
We're at the house of the high priest,
Yes,
where all these other family members of the high priest are.
probably. And they're the ones that say and call for false witnesses
Yeah.
at this point. So it's a setup. It's a kangaroo court.
So now, what do they do? So they got this family of Zadok. They're in power, and they are creating these false charges, basically.
Right. But okay, let me ask you this: do they also create? I hate to use this word, but well, it's not a word. It's a three-letter thing. They created their own BLM, their own Antifa, their
Yeah.
own shadow force that will incite riots, take the innocent along with them, and they are the ones that have infiltrated the crowd. They are the ones. I'm just surmising here. They're the ones that are out there saying, "Give us Barabbas." They're the ones that are, because they've paid these false witnesses. They've this shadow government has paid the false witnesses.
Yeah.
And then they incite the crowd to say, "Give us Barabbas," and they railroaded the verdict.
Yeah.
To that point.
So now they're going to lead Jesus out into public. They're going to walk him over to Pilate.
Right.
And the chief priests are going to be at the front row demanding Pilate do what?
Judge him.
Judge him. Judge him how?
To find him guilty.
They have a direct demand of him.
Right. They want him to.
They want him to be crucified.
Right. Well, they're giving, even though Pilate doesn't want to do it and washes his hands of it.
But he's still going to be held accountable, right?
Right.
So what is this declaration? Like their declaration, crucify him. What are they saying about Jesus? Like they're trying to lump him in with
the Romans.
They're trying the zealots. They're trying to.
They're pushing his.
They're saying this guy's a zealot. This guy is anti-Rome and he's inciting violence. And so Pilate's like having conversation, being like,
"They're accusing you of all these things, and what say you?"
And he's stuck with, I don't know. How do I? How? What?
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They're stuck because Pilate's like they're saying that you're a zealot and that you deserve to be crucified. He's like, I don't see this. I don't see. But are you going to actually have a defense, please? Now, Pilate is a shrewd government worker. Like he is this bulldog. He is strong. He is law and order. Everything's going to be done right. But here's what he also knows. The strength of rules is in the opportunity for grace. And so when they rule with this iron fist, once a year they go, hey, maybe we messed up. Maybe you feel like we did something wrong, or we'll give you somebody. We will give you a peace offering of, yeah, we're law and order, but there's grace. So I'll release. It's one of your festivals. I'll release. I'll release somebody from you for you.
Releases.
Do you want this innocent man or this murderer? He feels like it's a pretty simple choice, right? Because he knows these people. He's lived among them.
They're going to say murderer.
Well, he expects them to say
Barabbas.
Well, no, I don't think they expect him. He expects them to take Jesus.
Yeah.
Because this guy's a prophet. They just celebrated. Like he knows the story of the Antonia fortress, seeing him come into town. They celebrated him as a prophet just a week ago. These guys are going to want this prophet back.
Yeah. So then he would feel free to go ahead and crucify Jesus or Barabbas. But he doesn't.
And so,
Well, that's what I'm saying. The crowd was incited by internal forces.
what forces? What people?
The people of the Sanhedrin, the shadow Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. They were inciting the crowd that was gathered there. They were infiltrating the crowd.
So it seems the chief priests are really stirring things up.
Mm-hmm. At the same time, they're trying to keep their hands clean.
Yeah.
Because we talked about this being Passover. They didn't want to be unclean for Passover because that was really tough.
Let me read you John's gospel from chapter 19. John chapter 19. I'm going to start in verse 4. And we'll see this conversation go on. It says, you ready?
Yeah.
John chapter 19, verse 4. Pilate went out again and said to them, "See, I am bringing him out to you that you may know that I find no guilt in him." So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, and Pilate said to him, "Behold the man." When the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" And Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt in him." And the Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law we ought to die, because he has made himself the Son of God." And when Pilate heard this statement, he was even more afraid. He entered the headquarters again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. So Pilate said to him, "You will not speak to me? Do you not know that I have authority to release you and authority to crucify you?" And Jesus says, "You would have no authority over me at all unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore, he who delivered me over to you has the greater sin." And from then on, Pilate sought to release him. Pilate is arguing to release him. But the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are not Caesar's friend. Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar." So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judgment seat at a place called the Stone Pavement. Now it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about the 6th hour. And he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Shall I crucify your king?" Now, what did we say was the problem with this particular area? This particular patch of dirt was so unruly because
because of the zealots and because of
the Jewish people refused to do what?
They refused to honor Caesar.
They did. That was a problem.
Mm-hmm. And Pilate knew it.
So Pilate says, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered,
"We have no king but Caesar."
So Pilate delivered Jesus over to them to be crucified.
And they took him and led him away. They who? The Sanhedrin? The Jews? Who?
So according to John's gospel, and realistically, the Romans are going to do the work.
Right.
But who is behind this fight? Is Jesus picking a fight with Rome? Is Jesus against Rome?
No.
He hasn't been. Now, is Jesus against empire?
Yes.
Is he against taking advantage of other people and demanding of them and not valuing them as people?
No.
He's definitely against it, right? He's against taking advantage of people. And Rome definitely is that.
Yes.
But he isn't specifically he didn't march into town and go fight the Antonio Fortress and start killing guards.
He didn't pick any fight at all. He came in peace.
And so, but he did come to disrupt something else. What did Jesus come and challenge and disrupt?
He challenged the rule in the temple. He
Yes.
challenged how they were making his father's house unclean.
He
That
challenged,
was his big challenge.
and he challenged the oppression, the empire that was being built
inside
through the house of God.
Right.
Using the house of God as being a ruling power.
Right.
So he was against that.
He said so much of it, you've made it impossible
Yes.
for those that are outside the promise to accept or become part of the promise. You've made it impossible because of your rules, because of your actions, because of just the way that you run the temple. They make it impossible to follow all of the rules that they set in place.
So then, is Pilate alarmed by Jesus? Is he concerned by Jesus?
Well, he kept trying to prove.
He kept trying to beg the chief priests, realistically.
Right. Because he wanted, all Jesus had to do is say something.
Yeah, say something. Defend yourself. Give me a reason to let you go.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that they can do. But Pilate's also at a very tenuous space because what's his job?
Keep everything under control.
Keep it under control. What if he fails to keep things under control?
Then he's going to get replaced.
And when he gets replaced, what happens to him?
I don't know if he'd want to face Caesar.
Probably dying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what leverage do the Sadducees have? Do the chief priests have? Because they're pretty rich, right?
Yeah.
They've got money and influence, right?
Right.
Who do they have influence with?
Well, everybody in town, basically. But
do they have potential reach outside of town?
I would think so, but
money reaches a long ways, doesn't it?
yes, especially in this kingdom.
What's their threat to Pilate for him to get him to do what they want him to do?
I'm not sure what you're saying. What's their threat to Pilate? We'll rebel if you don't take care of our business. Is that what they're asking him to do?
Where is it? It was right here. Boop, 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 boop. Ah, here you go. Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out in verse 12, "If you release this man, you are not
our friend."
Whose friend?
A friend of Caesar's.
Caesar's friend.
So they're threatening to tell Caesar, "Hey, Pilate is trying to mess us up."
Everyone who makes himself a king opposes Caesar. So they're threatening to say, "Hey, you let this guy go. We're going to let Caesar know. Caesar's going to find out that there's somebody establishing and declaring themselves a king
in your favorite city." Yeah. Or a city.
Under your nose, and you've known about it and you didn't take care of it.
Right.
How do you think that's going to go?
Well, not good for Pilate, that's for sure.
So they know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, they put him between a rock and a hard place.
So who's manipulating this thing, and who's responsible ultimately
for the death of Jesus?
For the death of Jesus.
The Sanhedrin.
The chief priests, right?
Right. Well, at least 36 of them.
Yeah, this corrupt family.
Mm-hmm.
They've influenced the crowd. They've shown their influence over Pilate. Like, the challenge for Pilate is he can't find any wrongdoing.
Right.
But he also can't pacify the mob that is the chief priests.
Well, he can't pacify that shadow government that he's. I don't know. You think he's aware of it, other than the fact that there's
I mean, how much goes on in that area that he wasn't aware of?
man, probably very little. But then you're talking about
But what can he do to stop it?
yeah, you're talking about 72 Pharisees and Sadducees that meet in secret. That
Unreasonably rich.
yes. Well, then they also would have power. They
Like
would.
unconceivably wealthy.
Yeah.
The priesthood. Now, I'm not saying that that's true about pastors, because I is one, and
You ain't.
yeah. But this priesthood
Yes.
in Jerusalem was unfathomably wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And money creates a lot of influence, power, and
Yes, don't we know?
potential. And it's just incredible on this level when we're talking about this trial. Well, people say, well, it was a false trial. The Sanhedrin, well, that's right. The Sanhedrin, the official Sanhedrin, did not meet at night. But the shadow government Sanhedrin that was influenced and directed by the chief priests, that family of Annas, it did meet at night, and it did make decisions that pretty much ran the Sanhedrin, the real Sanhedrin.
Right.
And they had power and influence enough that the next morning, when the light sheds on everything and Jesus is standing before Pilate, that they're going to get what they want. Pilate's going to do what they want him to do. And he's going to crucify him as a zealot. And he's going to end up being mocked by the two men because they recognize that he's not one of them. You're not even one of us, and you ended up here. You know?
Yeah. They knew.
Yeah. Pretty crazy.
So the question that we ask at first is, who really crucified or had Jesus killed?
Yeah, who killed Jesus?
Yeah.
And I think it's easy. A lot of people teach, well, it was the Jews. I mean, they were Jews, but it's not the Jews as a whole.
No.
It wasn't all the people. It was a specific group of people who felt threatened by Jesus, felt like he was a challenge to them and a challenge to their way of life and their way of doing things.
He was a challenge to their continued level of power.
Yes.
For sure.
Yes.
And not because he wanted to take power, even though he could have. Like he said to Peter, I could bring 12 legions of angels right here. Right, I
mean, that's the statement he made to his disciples. I could call down 12 legions of angels and there wouldn't be anything that they can do, but this is
not who I am.
This is what the Father has asked, and so this is what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather do something else because, I've asked multiple times. He hasn't answered me. He hasn't backed off. So this is where we're going.
To fulfill prophecy.
Yeah. So in the end, it was Jews, but it wasn't all Jews.
It was a certain segment, 72.
Yeah, it was the chief priests.
Mm-hmm.
And now physically it was carried out by the Romans. Matter of fact, there's a I don't know, fable or like legend. I'll wrap up with this legend. Legend has it that Pilate, this is one of the last official acts of Pilate as governor, that he basically retires and is replaced, and he retires to Northern Africa, and that he and his wife convert to Christianity following this, and they to being followers of Christ and declaring and that they are the foundation and the beginners of the Coptic church in northern Africa. Legend has it. But this is the only time frame that we hear or know of anything about Pontius Pilate. Very shortly after this, he leaves town and he retires basically from his governmental duties with the Roman Empire and ends up spending the rest of his life in northern Africa, close to Egypt. So,
Never heard that. The Coptic Church.
The Coptic Church, yep, Coptic Christians. There was I won't say that, but yes, yeah, very, very influential group, church, Christian group, even today in northern Africa. Coptic, yeah, Coptic Church. So that's what we know. That's a conversation about the trial, and
I hope that we opened eyes, and ears.
I mean, the best thing you can do to continue to have this conversation is just read the 4 Gospels accounts of this and just think through this and understand culturally some of the implications of the declarations and the conversations that are made, and why the reference back to the chief priests over and over again is so important.
Right.
Because it's not just...
Well, I think that's the lullaby effect you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, the locations matter. The regular Sanhedrin met at the city gates. They didn't meet at the
Caiaphas' house.
Courtyard of the high priest's house.
Yeah.
That was the...
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to know the ins and outs of the synagogue, and I mean of the temple. You have to know the ins and outs of what these chief priests and elders actually did. And so, there's a much deeper story.
And it's kind of important that in this, you recognize that the audience that Matthew is writing to, the reason he doesn't cover a lot of those details is because he's writing to a Jewish audience.
To the Jewish audience.
Who should be aware of this layout because they've been here.
Yeah, well, they probably already knew about the shadow government too.
Yeah.
Because
it wasn't new to them.
No, well, gossip is.
Yeah. So, great conversation. We're going to continue to answer questions and have different conversations. You should come and join us in person sometime.